At dawn on the 6th of June 1944, the English Channel looked calm enough for hope. Under grey light, a line of landing craft opened their ramps, and the tanks drove straight into the sea. Within minutes, the waves had taken them. Some crews clawed out through canvas screens, others vanished beneath the surf. They had been told their Shermans could swim. Half a century later, divers still find their hulls resting on the sand. The idea of a swimming tank was older than D-Day. It began in 1939 with Nicholas Straussler, a Hungarian-born engineer working for Vickers in Britain. He believed that armour could float if balanced by canvas and air. Using a Valentine tank as test bed, Straussler fitted a folding canvas skirt around the hull and inflated it with compressed air. Screw propellers, driven by the tracks, gave just enough thrust to move through water at 4 knots. In 1940, as Britain stood alone, his contraption crossed a London reservoir before bewildered officers. The idea was dismissed, clever, impractical, and dangerous. Then Churchill saw the film. The Prime Minister wrote in the margin, "Find out whether this contraption can be made to work for the invasion." From that moment, the swimming tank was no longer a curiosity. It was an order. Straussler's design was handed to Major General Percy Hobart, commander of the 79th Armoured Division, the man Churchill trusted to turn eccentric ideas into weapons. Hobart's engineers perfected the concept. They called it the Duplex Drive, or DD for short, a system that allowed the tank to use 2 propulsion methods, tracks on land and propellers at sea. The first DD was a Valentine Mark IX with a canvas screen that rose 1.5 metres above the turret. Inflated by air pumps, the skirt turned the tank into a watertight raft. Twin propellers linked to the engine pushed it forward at 5 knots. Tests were uneasy. A puncture or crosswind could send the tank under in seconds. Crews called them prayers in canvas. But when the Valentine DD proved it could land on a beach and fight within minutes, the concept was approved for mass production. The British would refine it. The Americans would build it in numbers. In 1943, the Valentine was obsolete as a fighting tank. The new Sherman M4 offered power, range, and a stable platform for the DD system. British and American teams met at Fritton Lake and Moray Firth to adapt Straussler's canvas and Hobart's engineering to the larger machine. The resulting Sherman DD weighed over 30 tons, but could still float, thanks to an inflatable screen of rubberized canvas supported by folding metal struts. 2 rear propellers, driven through a transfer gearbox, the Duplex Drive, gave the tank forward motion. Each crew trained for weeks to escape a capsized tank, cut canvas, inflate Mae West, climb for air. In secret lakes and Scottish bays, platoons of Shermans emerged from the mist like creatures from another world, armoured rafts that could swim and fight. Engineers learned that 5-foot waves were the limit. Beyond that, the canvas collapsed under pressure, and the tank would drown. Still, the commanders wanted them ready for the invasion. By spring 1944, Britain's southern ports became floating cities of steel. Hidden beneath camouflage nets lay hundreds of odd-looking Shermans wrapped in canvas. To keep the secret, they were referred to only as DD tanks. Even many infantry officers didn't know what the initials meant. Training was brutal. Crews practiced night launches, blind navigation, and emergency escapes. Instructors reminded them that the screen must inflate for 15 seconds before entering the water. Too soon and it tore, too late, and the sea poured in. In the final week before D-Day, Hobart's 79th Armoured Division rehearsed on the Dorset coast, while US Army units repeated the ritual in the Solent. The orders were simple. Each DD would swim from its landing craft 2 miles offshore, reach the beach ahead of the infantry, and blast the first bunkers before men stepped into the surf. It was a bold idea, and a lethal one if the weather turned. H-hour, 6 June 1944, 06:20 a.m. The sea off Omaha Beach was running 6 feet high, far beyond the safe limit, yet under pressure of schedule, the 741st Tank Battalion launched its Shermans anyway, 2 miles from shore. Within minutes, canvas skirts buckled. Cold water cascaded over the turrets, engines stalled, propellers stopped. Out of 29 tanks, 27 sank before they reached the sand. Of the crews, fewer than half escaped alive. Infantry landing behind them faced the beach without armour support, caught in a storm of machine gun fire. Later, survivors would say that the DDS died buying them minutes to survive. Farther west at Utah Beach, the 75th Tank Battalion commander refused to launch in the rough sea. His DDS were carried close to shore and drove off the ramps directly. All but one made it. From tragedy came the lesson: the swimming tank worked, but only if the sea allowed it. While Omaha drowned, other beaches told a different story. At Sword, Gold and Juno, British and Canadian crews launched closer in, barely 1,000 yards offshore. The sea was calmer. The tanks floated. Witnesses watched in astonishment as shapes rose from the mist, grey hulls surrounded by fluttering canvas, ploughing toward the sand. When the screens dropped, the Shermans thundered forward, guns firing before the infantry even arrived. At Gold Beach, the 13th 18th Hussars destroyed the German strongpoints that had pinned down the first waves. On Juno, the Canadian 1st Hussars landed nearly every tank they launched. Hobart's unorthodox invention had vindicated itself in fire. By nightfall, more than 80 DD Shermans were fighting inland, proof that steel could indeed swim. The losses at Omaha forced a reckoning. American ordnance officers studied every wreck that divers could reach. They found waterlogged engines, torn seams, and screens punctured by debris. Within weeks, US engineers reinforced the supports, doubled the inflation pumps, and redesigned the propeller housings. In England, Hobart's men trained their American counterparts in the 79th Armoured Division School at Fritton Lake. The motto pinned to the dock read, "Float, fight, survive." Joint exercises proved that, with care, the DD could work in any theatre. In Italy, the 7th Hussars ferried their DD Shermans across the Po River. In the Pacific, prototypes tested in Hawaii bobbed among coral shallows, too delicate for combat, but proof of concept for future amphibious armour. By 1945, what had begun as a British eccentricity had become an Allied doctrine. Few inventions of the war were guarded more closely. The Germans knew nothing of a swimming tank. Fritton Lake was sealed behind wire, letters were censored. Even aerial reconnaissance photographs were doctored to hide the odd shapes moored there. Crews swore oaths not to discuss the design outside camp. They referred to it only as the DD gear. The deception worked. When Allied DDS appeared off Normandy, German spotters radioed in panic about rafts carrying tanks. No one believed them until the guns opened. The secrecy had held for 3 years, an engineering miracle hidden beneath canvas and code words. In March 1945, the Allied armies reached the Rhine, the last natural barrier before Germany's heartland. Engineers built pontoon bridges, but Hobart's division wanted a faster way. At dawn on the 24th of March, beneath a smokescreen, Sherman DDs eased into the swirling river. The current was strong, the enemy guns were waiting. One by one the tanks churned across, propellers biting through the flow, water lapping just below their turrets. When they reached the far bank, the crews dropped their screens and opened fire, clearing pockets of resistance for the infantry that followed. In 20 minutes they had done what planners once thought impossible: a tank assault across Germany's greatest river without a single bridge. That crossing marked the final vindication of Straussler's dream and Churchill's gamble. steel had learned to swim and win. When the war ended, most DD Shermans were scrapped, their canvas rotting beside quiet lakes, but the idea they carried survived. At the British Fighting Vehicle Research Establishment in Chertsey, engineers studied every bolt and pump that had kept a tank afloat. Their lessons flowed into new machines, the Centurion AVRES, bridge layers, and amphibious carriers that would cross Korea's rivers and Cold War frontiers. Across the Atlantic, the US Army adapted Straussler's concept into the LVT-based amphibious assault family, and later the M2 Bradley and AAV designs inherited the same philosophy: mobility where no roads exist. Each owed a debt to those canvas-skirted Shermans that had dared the Channel. Few machines in war demanded so much faith from the men who crewed them. Inside each DD tank, 4 or 5 soldiers trusted canvas, compressed air, and their own hands to keep 30 tons of steel from the sea. Some never made it. Others rolled ashore and turned the tide of the greatest invasion in history. When you stand today on the beach at Courseulles or Sword, the tide still rises over their silent hulls. They remain half buried, half remembered, proof that courage is not only to fight, but to believe that the impossible can float.